I did it again. I forgot to turn on my mic. So, good morning, everybody. Today we are going to talk a little bit more about critical reasoning and critical thinking. Well, which one would be the other? So, we're going to go into basically it's shortcuts that our brain takes. They're formally known as logical fallacies. And specifically, we are going to analyze the break down the kind of reasoning and analyze the arguments that the lawyers are using in court, focusing on a real life case where these strategies are prominent. So, we're going to help everyone become a little bit more of a sharper thinker and a more critical thinker. Going through a lot of this is really good for me, and hopefully it's good for you guys. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into learning more about these arguments. So this is going to be Georgia versus Leilani Simon, day 1. I'm a little bit behind. So an overview is Leilani Simon. She initially reported her son as abducted, stating she had last seen him in their home before going to bed. However, as police investigated, her story kind of began to unravel, and inconsistencies in her accounts raised suspicions. Eventually, police arrested Leilani and accusing her of killing Quentin and disposing of his body in a dumpster. All right, we're going to take a look at the first clip, and we're going to talk about a little bit about the shortcut in thinking that I think is going on here.
At about a year and a half old, a little bit over that, 20 months. Like all children, he was blameless, he was innocent, and he was beautiful. And like all children, he was totally defenseless, totally and completely dependent on the adults in his life to take care of him and to look out for his safety. And the evidence in this case will show that the defendant violated that trust, that most basic, sacred trust of a parent, in the most horrible way.
Good morning, delusional mint mocha. Okay, so the first thing out of the gate, well, I want to ask you guys a question. What do you guys think about letting emotional appeals? Should we let emotional appeals influence our decision making in cases like this? First, the attorney, he's portraying, I can't remember his name, he is portraying the victim as innocent and defenseless. The prosecutor emphasized that the child was blameless, innocent, and beautiful, and totally dependent on adults for his safety. All of these things are true. I just want to state that before we keep going any further. All of these things are true, but these are things we need to stop and take a closer look at. So by using words like blameless, innocent, and beautiful, these evoke emotions in us. And in this situation, when he's pointing out that Quentin was dependent on his mother for keeping him safe, this invokes sympathy for the child and outrage towards the defendant. He's also describing the act as horrific and inhuman. Statements like the defendant threw him away like a piece of trash are meant to shock and evoke anger or disgust, framing the crime as heartless and cruel. Next, he appeals to the sacred parental duty, and he frames this as the defendant's actions as violating the most basic sacred trust between a parent and a child. The prosecutor taps into the deep emotional value society places on parental responsibility and care. Of course, all of that's true, like I said before. Here's the issue. By focusing so much on the emotional pain of the situation, the prosecutor is shifting attention away from hard evidence. This tactic stirs up feelings of outrage and sadness in the jury, which can cloud their logical analysis of the facts. The emotional appeal works because as humans, we're wired to care about vulnerable individuals. But in court, emotions shouldn't replace hard evidence. The prosecutor subtly suggests that since the defendant didn't protect her child, she must be guilty. That's a shortcut to make the jury think, how could she do that to him? Without addressing the actual cause of death and direct evidence tying her to the crime. Uh-oh. Oh. When is that? A little zipper? A little zipper face from Delusional Mint Mocha? I can't tell. Oops. So, appeal to emotion is an emotional appeal influences by evoking feelings rather than relying on logic and factual information. Next one we're going to take a look at is the straw man fallacy.
Go to sleep like everything was normal, and wake up the next morning and report it to the police as an abduction. I woke up, my front door was open, and my child is missing. Now the story started to fall apart pretty quickly because of good, solid police work. But she would go on to tell a series of evolving lies over several weeks, only moving from one lie to the next as the police picked apart the first lie and presented her with the evidence that made the first lie untenable. So now it's time to move on to lie number 2, and 3, and 4. And as they're doing this with her, they're also searching for his body, which they ultimately discovered about 6 weeks after his disappearance.
Okay, so the straw man fallacy, this works by distorting or oversimplifying someone's behavior, like inconsistencies in a story, and presenting it as the main issue. The argument becomes, since she lied, she must be guilty. But lying under pressure, especially in such a chaotic situation, doesn't automatically prove intent to murder. The prosecutor is using this fallacy to avoid engaging with complex details that could suggest other possibilities, like an accident or another party being involved. So, what do you guys think about inconsistencies? Do you think that they always mean someone is guilty? Or could there simply be more to the story? Oh, Mocha, you put broken heart and a sad face, or Quentin. Okay. Yeah. It's oh, it's heartbreaking. We're looking at these today, not to say it's we're not trying to say that anything is untrue in this. We're looking specifically at the arguments that the prosecutor is putting forward. Just want to say that again before I get hated on. I'm probably going to get hated on anyway. Well, good morning, Fancy Glam. Great. I'm glad you're listening. So, the straw man fallacy, we're going to go over it again. It misrepresents or oversimplifies someone's behavior, and it focuses on discrepancies in a narrative as the main issue. Throughout the testimony, the prosecutor highlights that the defendant lied multiple times. While lying may raise suspicion, it's not direct evidence of guilt. But the prosecution is essentially building a straw man narrative here, focusing on these lies instead of confronting possible alternative explanations for the crime.
About what the evidence is going to show, as far as what's the biggest thing going on in the defendant's life. And the biggest thing going on in her life in the months, days leading up to October 4th is the status of her relationship with Daniel Young. Things are not good. She is feeling unloved, undesired, ignored. And I'll show you a couple of text messages taken from her phone by the investigators that show this. Now, this is kind of small on here, and it's kind of bright, so I'll read it for you for those of you who can't see. Some of you may be able to read it, perhaps not all of you can. This is July of 2022. I want to feel beautiful, not barely average. I want to feel loved and not just liked. I want to feel wanted, not just tolerated. I want to be able to look at you and know it's just me, not wonder how many others there are. I want to feel like my body is worth showing off, not like it's just been trashed from having 3 kids. I want to feel the way you made me feel in the beginning, like I'm treasured and safe, not like I'm just here because you really don't have a choice. And you'll see quite a number of messages like this.
Okay. This is a very dangerous leap in logic. Just because someone is going through emotional distress doesn't mean it logically follows that they would commit such a heinous act. The prosecution skips over the need for direct evidence of the crime and uses mental kind of pseudo guilt. The shortcut assumes a causal link between 2 events just because one follows the other. It's a shortcut that could mislead the jury into thinking, oh, she was unstable, so she must have done it, without solid proof. So how often do you guys see linking unrelated events in everyday life? Can you think of a time when this type of reasoning misled you? And I call this one, it's after this, therefore because of this. The prosecution is making a connection between the defendant's emotional turmoil and the death of her child. They argue that because she was experiencing personal difficulties like relationship problems and depression, these issues cause her to commit murder. A lot of people go through these things every day and they don't do this. This isn't the outcome. So this one's kind of, we're kind of summarizing everything that we've seen here with these next examples. By selectively using the text messages, the prosecutor, he's highlighting several emotionally charged text messages from Leilani, expressing frustration with her relationship and dissatisfaction with herself, such as, I want to feel loved, not just liked. You're the reason I'm depressed. There's potential cherry picking here. The prosecutor is using these specific texts to paint a picture of Simon as emotionally unstable and frustrated. And that aligns with their argument that this emotional distress led her to harm her child. However, they might not present any other text messages or communications that show Simon expressing love for her children or dealing with her emotions in a healthy way. Focusing only on negative messages that could be cherry picking evidence to support their narrative. They're excluding possible explanations for the behavior. The prosecutor repeatedly emphasizes that Simon killed her child and then acted normally by going back to sleep. They present her behavior as indicative of guilt, stating she would go home, go to sleep like everything was normal. Potential cherry picking of this is, or it could be seen as cherry picking because it ignores possible explanations for Simon's behavior, such as extreme emotional distress, shock, or mental illness. They aren't exploring or presenting these possible mitigating factors. The prosecutor selectively uses facts that can strengthen the argument for premeditated guilt while he's suppressing alternative explanations that might portray Simon's actions in a different light. He's excluding other possible explanations for the behavior. He repeatedly emphasizes that Simon killed her child and then acted normally by going back to sleep. They present her behavior as indicative of guilt. You know what? I think I accidentally copied and pasted that in there twice. Hold on a second. Okay. So he focuses on flawed or inconsistent stories. Okay, sorry. He points out that Simon told the police that she moved from, the police claiming she moved from one lie to the next. When her first story fell apart, this inconsistency is presented as definitive proof of guilt. While inconsistent stories can indicate guilt, they could also result from fear, confusion, or psychological stress. The prosecutor highlights only the incriminating aspect of her inconsistent statements and does not seem to consider the full context in which these lies may have been told. He omits the potential contributing factors in the relationship. The prosecutor is painting Simon's relationship with her boyfriend as the primary source for emotional distress, and he focuses heavily on the feelings of being unloved. However, they don't present any evidence or testimony that might provide context or background for her emotional state, such as mental health issues or external pressures like financial strain or family stress. I think she did have some financial stuff going on. He's potentially suppressing evidence by focusing only on the relationship and leaving out other factors that might have contributed to Simon's emotional distress or potential instability. Prosecution is selectively building a narrative, something we all talk about a lot, that supports their case. So in these examples, the prosecution seems to focus on selective evidence that fits their narrative of guilt while potentially downplaying or ignoring other facts that might provide a more complete picture of Simon's emotional and psychological state at the time of the incident. Okay, now this one is hard to get. I have a hard time with this one. Finally, we have circular reasoning. The prosecutor argues the defendant must be guilty because she lied, and she must have lied because she's guilty. See the circle? The reasoning circles back on itself without providing any new or solid evidence. It's kind of a shortcut, and it relies on assumptions rather than facts. Assuming guilt based on actions without proving guilt first. The prosecution repeatedly states that Leilani Simon killed her child and then acted as though everything was normal. For instance, she killed him, got in her car with his body, drove to the dumpster, and threw him away like trash. They present her actions as of going to sleep afterwards as proof of her guilt, arguing that only a guilty person would behave this way. She would go home, go to sleep like everything was normal, and wake up the next morning and report it to the police as an abduction. The circular reasoning. The prosecutor's argument seems to assume that because Simon is guilty, her actions, going back to sleep, are proof of guilt. However, this presupposes her guilt rather than proving it. They argue that her behavior proves her guilt, but the argument relies on an unproven premises that she is already guilty. Assuming lies are evidence of guilt, which proves she lied to cover her guilt. The prosecutor states that Simon told multiple lies, moving from one lie to the next, as the police confronted her with evidence. They argue that the lies are proof of guilt. She would go on to tell a series of evolving lies over several weeks, moving from one lie to the next. That's the quote that the prosecution gives. The prosecution suggests that Simon's lies are evidence of guilt. However, they also use her presumed guilty as the reason she lied in the first place. In other words, Simon is guilty because she lied, and she lied because she's guilty. The reasoning loops back on itself without external proof of either the lies indicating guilt or the guilt being the reason for the lies. Using an emotional state as both cause and proof of guilt, the prosecution spends a lot of time detailing Simon's emotional distress, implying that her unstable mood led her to committing the crime. They then argue that her behavior after the crime, such as returning to normal activities, proves her guilt because only a guilty person would act that way. The prosecutor makes a statement. She was feeling unloved, undesired, ignored. And this is the biggest thing going on in her life. The circular reasoning here, the argument suggests that because Simon felt emotionally unstable, she must have killed her child. Then they argue that her emotional state after the crime confirms the instability and her guilt. Essentially, they assume that her emotional instability caused the crime, then use her post-crime emotional state as proof that she could commit it without offering independent evidence to link her emotions directly to the crime. In each of these examples, the prosecution's reasoning relies on already assuming the guilt of Leilani to prove that very guilt, creating a circular argument. This technique reinforces the idea that the defendant's behavior proves her guilt, but it's essentially like saying she's guilty because she's guilty. The argument doesn't move any kind of logic forward or provide actual evidence linking her directly to the crime. It's another way of distracting the jury from analyzing the hard evidence or lack thereof. So ask yourself, have you ever caught yourself or others using circular reasoning in discussions? And we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a recap of everything that we saw in this first day's analysis of the arguments that the prosecutor is making. So the emotional appeal fallacy. This fallacy, it manipulates emotions to persuade the audience rather than relying on facts or logic. The example, the prosecution described the defendant as treating her child like trash, and it evokes anger and horror, pushing the jury to feel guilty or disgusted rather than focusing on objective evidence. The straw man fallacy. This occurs when someone misrepresents or oversimplifies an argument, making it easier to attack. Example of that in this case, the prosecution might suggest the defense is arguing the mother was perfectly fine and innocent, then attacks that oversimplified version of the defense's position rather than addressing the actual arguments. So basically, straw man fallacy, this is where the prosecution is assuming what direction the defense is going to go in. And then the after this, therefore, because of this, the formal name of that is post hoc ergo propter hoc. You gotta love lawyers and their Latin. I actually love Latin, but it's another story for another day. This fallacy, it assumes that just because one event happened after another, the first must have caused the second. The example that the prosecution puts out there is it implies that because the defendant was emotionally distressed before the child's death, her emotional state must have caused her to commit murder. How many of us have been in an emotional state and we didn't murder anyone? I'm assuming everyone in my audience. And then the next one is circular reasoning. This fallacy occurs when the conclusion of an argument is assumed in the premises. The prosecution claims that Simon's actions, like lying to the police, prove her guilt. However, they assume her guilt as the reason she lied, and it creates a circular argument where it goes around and around. And then the suppressed evidence or cherry picking, they're highlighting that that she just went back to bed and acted as everything was normal. If we were looking at the entire context of this situation, then we could see how there might be other things that she did that would indicate remorse, or might indicate, she could have had a conversation with a supposed, um, other person that might have been involved. So that's about it for my analysis of the different, kind of mental shortcuts that the prosecution is taking on this first day in his argument. Do you see what I'm saying, you guys? Like it's kind of almost a manipulation, because lawyers know that they're making these arguments. They know that they're making, I would say, sketchy arguments. They know that they're doing this. They're going a specific way. So to me, that's meaningful. And it's something that can get you tripped up in everyday life. So, because sometimes people know that they're making a bad argument. So have you guys seen any of these things going on in, everyday life? I know that I have. You'll see cherry picking a lot in, an example. If anybody was in Shining Survivors last night, the text messages that Ziggy was talking about, she was a cherry picking fool, because she was attributing, you know, one intention to another, when that's not necessarily what was being said. She was, attributing it, what was being said, which could be very oblique, that it meant something, or it was proof that someone was involved in something that they might not have been. Yes, fancy. We are up to our eyeballs in examples of this. We see it all the time, and that's why context is important. That's something that the dictums and I'm the one who does all the main editing. So that's something that I really try to widen the scope on, and make sure that we get all of the context in there before I kind of say, hey, this is messed up. So I try to really kind of keep a broad focus like that. That's why that's important. Personally, I don't like to cherry pick. I don't like suppressing, other stuff that might explain what is going on. So why you can't be clipping out. You have to think hard about what, you know, because we have to make things shorter and take out all the silent parts and there's a lot in like Purple's videos. We have to take all that out. And then sometimes there might be an that we have to take out, a lot of little things that don't necessarily really make sense. They don't go with the whole argument, or, because like she might have said good morning to someone in the middle of her live stream. We're going to take that out because what does that have to do with the facts that we're presenting? Doesn't have anything to do with it. We take that out and it gives more room for context. So, the straw man fallacy, I'm trying to think. I know that I see it. I think I saw it in the situation with Karen and the call about the welfare check for KK. There was kind of I think I pointed this out. I think it was like a series of like 4 or 5 videos, but everybody was kind of focusing on that. Karen admitted to making a call. Well, when you looked closer at the the transcript from the phone call that the police condensed for, yeah. In context, that was the one with Karen that was rough to sort through. But, if we looked at the conversation that she had on Shinings, and she was under a lot of pressure, so I kind of felt like there was a good chance of getting the truth in that. Well, when you looked at the transcript from the call, it was all this other stuff. This person, whoever it was calling, and they were complaining that that KK was live streaming them. Well, she's got her username, but she doesn't do videos. So why would Karen complain about that? And then there is also I'm trying to remember because now I'm going off the cuff right now. Oh, they were, I think there was verbiage, there was specific wording that Heidi used, and then that same wording was in the transcript. So, and I went through, I followed it all the way through. I didn't just, assume guilt based on they used the same wording. Instead, I used it as like, a little flag. Hey, there might be something here. And took a closer look at that. And I kept putting pressure on Purple, by going up on her live stream, getting into an argument with her about it. And I kept putting pressure on her, pressure on her, pressure on her until she finally told. And it was, just a very little clip where she said that she gave her phone number, or KK's phone number, to Heidi. So there you go. Finally, I got to the truth of the matter. And the truth of the matter, the entire context is it does matter that Karen called. It does matter because it's very likely her accounting was true, that she called and she said she was concerned about that KK would have a stroke and that it wasn't documented, like Karen said. And that also, that Purple and Heidi were responsible for the phone call. And Purple, if you want to dredge all this up again and, push back against me, I can go ahead and we'll make all the videos brand new again. So, yeah, that's pretty much that was gosh, that was a whole bunch of stuff. I went through that. I don't even remember. That was cherry picking. It was circular reasoning. It had a little bit of everything in that. It was, there was at one point, someone was saying, well, it doesn't matter if Heidi and Purple were involved because, Karen admitted it. Well, no, it does matter. At least to me, it did matter because it has to do with what is important to me is intention. And Karen's intentions, to me, Karen's intentions were genuine because she was talking about strokes, and the transcript from when Heidi called in is talking, the first thing out of her mouth is she's complaining that KK was live streaming her. That's not a good intention. And I think it's fair to say that was the focus of the phone call, was to complain that KK was live streaming them. So we got a little bit off topic, but I feel like I hope I've illustrated that a little bit more clearly, my line of thinking. But I thought that, and so did the other victims, we thought it was important to get all the way down to the very, I'm trying to think, like the substrate or the foundation. That's what it is. Get all the way down to the foundation of all of what happened, not just blame it all on Karen. So I got it out there. We worked hard. We got it out there. And we made a video of it and we laid it all out there. People can watch it if they want to, and look at the whole thing in its entirety, or they don't have to. But information was being hidden, and you had to really, bore into it. You would think that Purple would have noticed that before she got on my panel, that I would just drill her. Anyway, so that's about the summation of what I had prepared today. And I kind of wanted to take a look at the different, I guess, shortcuts or missed errors in thinking, and how the prosecution is, he's taking advantage of those. Right or wrong, he is highlighting those. So next we're going to look at, and we're all going to have to sit back and wait and see how the defense, how do they, kind of knock these things down one by one. And, we have to see how they address them. Because this kind of stuff, this right here, this is what the defense is listening for. They're listening, they're categorizing everything that the prosecution is saying. They're categorizing it as, they're kind of categorizing it, and they're going back to their offices and kind of sorting it out and figuring out, how do I argue against this? And then how do we, what's our argument out of the gate? So they've kind of got two things, that they're juggling, and to create question, you know, I guess reasonable doubt, because that's what they're going for. That's what they're shooting for. So I hope this was enjoyable and kind of gave you guys a little bit more of an idea of, and I'm not an attorney, I'm just picking out these logical fallacies that I see, and I'm kind of laying out and double checking how I understand these fallacies. So, if you guys have any comments or further thoughts, go ahead and put those down in the comments, and we can talk a little bit more about them and address them. And yeah, so that's probably about the summation of what I prepared for today. And I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And go ahead and give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Either one works. And, subscribe if you want to hate watch, subscribe if you want to genuinely watch, subscribe. So I will talk to you guys in another day or so, and we're going to take a look at the other arguments that are going to be presented. And I'm going to try to try to kind of sort out where the attorneys, specifically prosecution, is going in their questioning, what they're trying to outline. So everybody have a great day. Fancy, get those chores done. All right, you guys, thank you so much for your time.